Okay. Well, unfortunately, that one's not going to stick as much on our playlist, but we'll see if album number 3 will, and that is K.D. Lang's Shadowland. Before I give the first take, Matt, do you want to run the numbers?
So K.D. Lang's Shadowland comes in at number 1,342 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 136 in 1988, number 9,101 of all time. It's K.D. Lang's second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind 1992's Ingenue. I don't know. Ingenue. See, this is why I am not the word guy.
That would not have been what I would have thought. Wow, that's an all-timer right there.
Ingenue, whatever. That album. This Shadowland, I can pronounce that one, was not on Rolling Stone's list, and K.D. Lang is ranked number 1,423 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Gotcha. Well, my parents owned both this album and Ingenue, so I heard this quite a bit.
Did Ingenue have Constant Craving on it?
It did, yes.
Okay,
that was the big hit off of it.
Yeah, she blew
Well, she had a couple different hits, like at different times, but yeah, that's probably the one that most people know. There's a song called Black Coffee.
Yes, on this album.
Mm-hmm. On this album, that was a pretty big song, and I can definitely remember hearing "I'm Down to My Last Cigarette" on the radio as well at different times. But this is an album I really enjoy. I kind of K.D. Lang is a throwback to older country, like not quite like outlaw country, but like Patsy Cline, right? Like country, and there's an Elvis element to like how K.D. Lang sings. Yep. And I guess the other person during this era of time that always reminds me a little bit of K.D. Lang, who's doing sort of the same thing, was like Chris Isaak was another guy who I thought kind of was that Elvis influenced, slightly country, modernized version of it. But I really like the mood of this album. It's just an album that very much evoked a place for me, kind of like in a rainy cafe, or even it was both equally as apropos for a rainy cafe as it was like sort of a bar, like a dive bar that you'd go to where there's an act and she's sort of on the stage on like an open mic type deal, singing. It has a little bit of that grittiness, but also the mainstream accessibility, right? That those musics have as well. It's both of its time, but also of another time before that. So I love K.D. Lang's voice. It's a really rich tone, like a huskier tone, but rich, warm, I'd say. Even when she's, and I love her lyrics, and there's humor in her lyrics, but even when she's not singing about anything particularly profound, the way she sings makes you pay attention to what she's saying, even if what she's saying is not weighty, if that makes sense. Just because it seems like it should be important or more profound than it is would be the best way I would kind of describe that element of her performing. But she, how would, I guess, and I've got some other stuff I guess that I can throw in later that I want to go to, but I don't want to like step over your takes. I'm very mindful of not repeating and giving too much all at once, and so I'll hold some back to go. I think Matt gets the second take here. Matt, what did you think of this one?
Yeah, so I always knew, I've known K.D. Lang's name. I remember her, probably being interviewed and just being in the ether. I had no idea she did country music like that. I was as soon as I heard the first song, I said, K.D. Lang's okay. Maybe this is just Western Stars. It's just like a throwaway country song, and then then we're gonna get like the K.D. Lang thing, whatever that is. And as it turns out, no, that's basically what it is, which was surprising to me for whatever reason. I never knew that. So I did learn that. Country Western is what is the genre that, I mean, you talk about the old time country sound. I mean, that's country and Western music, like the Patsy Cline, as well as just almost like standards. There's like a,
I think
there's just
all
like
that's like the Elvis feel for me. Yeah, it's like because that where blues meets country western meets.
Yeah. Or even just like lounge kind of singer
roll
stuff, like, even like a Tony Bennett kind of, there's a little bit of that in here. And yeah, Josh, you're right. I'm looking here now. They're all covers. And
right.
Actually, Chris Isaac he wrote Western Stars, the opening track.
Well, it makes sense because it sounds exacgly like a Chris Isaac. I didn't know that. Wow. Okay. I know that. So
this, and I'm not really recognizing a whole lot of the other writers on here, but so. Yeah, this was an easy listen. This is like an old, it's kind of like going back to the old standard, comfort. It's like comfort food of music. It's like an old familiar friend that you just lost touch with for so many years and you forgot was out there, and it come back to it and you're just like, oh man, this is, how do you not like this? This is stuff my grandparents would love too. Like this is kind of like a universal type song. There's not really any edge to it. So if you want something that's like this, I don't know, unique, edgy sound, or production or, tricks in the studio, you're certainly not getting it. This is just stripped down. It's quasi singer songwriter, lots of country. To me, this is more of the steel guitar or the slide guitar than the American Music Club. Although that was in there, much more. It's defined
by it too. Yep.
Yeah, it's much more prominent here, and it's just an easy listening. There's some sad stuff in here. There's a little jazz. There's some jazzy elements as well, I would say. So you're really just throwing. Just take any classical pop, genre, and kind of just throw it in a blender, and this is what it is, right? This is kind of like the beginning of music. This is before rock and roll, certainly. But there's just so many things in here that are just. It's very easy to just put on, and just. Envelop yourself in and just let it be, because it's just a really pretty sounding record. She's got a great voice. I liked how she was doing on what is it, Waltz Me Once Again Around the Dance Floor. At the end she's doing the like she gets that guttural kind of like vocal thing that's going in there. She's scooping the voice, and just really, really easy, pleasant listen. So yeah, I can't do anything but give a thumbs up on this.
Yeah, this album was a real eye-opener for me. I loved it. It was all the things that you guys said. Her voice is the clear standout. It really has a range and a power to it, and she seems to be able to have a lot of control over how she uses it, and she really kind of embodies these songs, and the album really drew me in with right from the start. She just seemed to have this kind of power to her that I really responded to. The songs being all covers, it is like her kind of, it is her interpretation of them, but it's also very much an homage to how they probably originally sounded. It is almost like these are like country standards that she is, updating to some extent, or at least, reinterpreting. But she clearly has some sort of affection for this sound too, because she just I really feels like she embodies them and singing it, and is having a good time. The last song, Honky Tonk Medley, has Loretta Lynn on it, and Brenda Lee and Kitty Wilson, who are all famous female country artists, and so I think she's indebted to them, and she's also just seems to have great affection for performing with them, and she has a lot of fun. There's a mix of kind of upbeat country, like with Waltz Me Around. That's kind of got a toe tapping, like country swing sound to it, and there's a lot of good instrumentation on this. Like the pedal steel features on here, the lap steel too. I think these are all kind of like hallmarks of classic country, and this music is almost, different. We touched on some country albums throughout the decades up to this point, but these songs are almost like pre-60s country that we've talked about. So it really kind of has a kind of a fresh sound for me listening to it. And I've actually seen her perform before with Neko Case and Lang, and that they did a trio album called Case Lang Veers, and she was really, the audiences was really into her, and I enjoyed her performance as well. But this even on a song like Black Coffee, which I think is a real standout track for me, and I think I'd heard it before somewhere along the way, she brings like a sultry sexiness to it as well. And so I guess my point is that she has a range in her emotions that she brings to these songs, and the singing is top notch. And I think it seems like there's a lot of personnel on that album in terms of session musicians, or just kind of people who really know what they're doing, because the album sounds great as well. And it's just it was just a pleasure to listen to. It's really high up there for me, and very different than what we're used to listening to on the podcast. Country's always been a small segment of the genre that we listen to, and just big thumbs up from me.
But Matt is right too. It's got like that element of the standards and that torch, the torch singers. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about when I say torch music, like singing about like lost love and love gone, but in sort of a broader way. Like sometimes like Dusty Springfield could be a torch singer. She did a cover of like Roy Orbison, Crying, another guy who wrote like torch songs a little bit, and that's another good comparative point. I think Roy Orbison, like the lane he's in. Is it country? Is it rock and roll? Is it blues? Or is the answer yes, right? It's kind of all of them. And that's the Chris Isaak thing too. And interestingly enough, Matt, the fact that you brought it up, I kind of chuckled as I did it right here. She actually did an album with Tony Bennett of standards in 2001. Yeah, I didn't know that, but it's like, I could absolutely see that.
I forgot that she did. That does ring a bell now, but I don't know, maybe that's part of why that came up in my head as well. But yeah, it didn't. I agree with you, Josh. It's kind of it's different than that Loretta Lynn and Dolly Parton records that we covered from. Those were were those 60s? Is that
I think so.
Well, it's not of the American South or rural America, because she's Canadian,
right? And, it doesn't have that Southern kind of. It's more of like an old standard Western, but also like just. Again, I go back to like a standard kind of. This is stuff that I could see my grandmother and grandparents lived like that. The greatest generation, like stuff like that. That this is kind of falling in the lane that's of some of the music that they would have listened to as well. So it does kind of have that older. It's that older, timeless sound. That's just it's
like adult music songs, but adult themes written, without like vulgarity, right? Like you use like Black Coffee to stand in for the relationship, right? Like everything that's in it. You don't have to feel the need to talk about the love or the loss or the passion or it's just like you just use these analogies, right? And we haven't even mentioned, by the way, one of the things that's most interesting about Katie Lang is like her persona, right? Like while she's singing sort of this very classic music, she was this very like androgynous figure, right? Like especially at this time, because she had not formally come out at this time,
right.
And she's winning Grammys, and Nashville has no idea what to make of her, right? Because, here's this like androgynous, like vegetarian, right? Then they're like, but singing music that like their audience loves, right? And what do you do? She's not like poking you in the face, but she's not going to play the Grand Ole Opry very easily either. So I think her lane was very interesting, because I can definitely remember when I first saw her at the end of the 80s and even in the early 90s when she was doing stuff, she had sort of a striking presence, because there was like really nobody else, in that type of music that sounded so traditional, but who was sort of, I hesitate to even say gender bending, but, it would be like wearing suits and having shorter hair, but also being, having definitively feminine, characteristics, facially and stuff. And that is another interesting thing about her as sort of as a pop culture icon, because she was like winning these Grammys and crossing over while also doing it in a way that didn't easily define. It wasn't easy to define, I think, would be the best way I'd put it. So I always find that interesting when somebody is like completely non-traditional in one front and then is doing traditional music. So
Right.
yeah.
No, it was
But
yeah,
it's not shtick, yeah.
yeah, it was. It's clearly something she identified with musically, and I feel the joy behind the album, I guess, ultimately.
Yeah. Was this
And reverence for the type of music.
Exactly.
You could tell
Yeah,
this is
that would
like
be a better word.
well-studied, of the genre and
Yeah.
like a love letter, but also with her own touch.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. John, so where'd you get this from? Post-punk flashcards?
No. Yeah, no.
Do you remember?
No, this was on one of the top lists. It wasn't on Rolling Stone.
I didn't see it on Rolling Stone. I
Okay.
can double check there, but I don't think so.
It was definitely on one of those lists. Like
Yeah.
the top
I wonder
100
if it's
albums from
1001.
one of them, or
And this is also an album that could have shown up in any decade, made any decades list, because it's not. This is
for
not an
sure.
'80s route. Like what decade would you associate this record with? Like it
You
doesn't.
could release this now, really.
Exactly
Still,
right.
yeah,
It's as much as a timeless record as we've covered, because it really could fit at any time.
Yep.
Yeah. So thumbs up for me for sure.
Yeah, for me too.